Greetings everyone, my name is Wilbur Reid and I'm excited that you've chosen to spend some time with me to explore ways to help make your business ventures more successful. Now an MBA includes a lot of courses like accounting and finance and economics that help prepare students and alumni to be successful in their business ventures. And a business plan brings all of those functions together for success. So my goal in this workshop is to provide an overview of what's included in a business plan so that you can be more successful in what you're working on. So first, let me tell you a little bit about my experience and background. So in my 20s, I got a degree from Milligan College in business and then began working at a local bank in Knoxville as a commercial real estate lender. And as I was working at the bank, then I got an MBA from the University of Tennessee in finance. So then in my 30s, I went to work for Kimberly-Clark Corporation, and a lot of people don't recognize the name Kimberly-Clark, but you recognize our brands like Kleenex and Huggies and Kotex and Depends and Scott Paper and all of those. And so I was the pricing manager of the healthcare division. So we sold exam gloves, face masks, a lot of the disposable gowns and things that you see in hospitals is what we sold. So I was responsible for margin management and that type of thing with our contracts with the hospitals. Then in my 40s, I went to work for Genuine Parts Company. And again, a lot of people don't recognize the Genuine Parts name, but Napa Auto Parts is half of our business. I actually worked on the office supply side, and I spent a lot of my time working with our independent office supply dealers, which were small businesses, typically 5 to 50 employees, and I was sort of like a consultant for them, particularly on the topic of pricing and margin management, how they should price their products and manage their business from that perspective, and developed a software tool for them that patent pending called MyAnalyst Pro, which they were able to utilize and manage the margins in their business. So that was actually my favorite part of my job, was working with these small business owners. And then while I was doing that, I also got a PhD in organizational leadership with an eye toward teaching at some point. And so that opportunity presented itself in my 50s when Johnson University started their School of Business and Public Leadership. And I came on board, left the corporate world full-time, came on board with Johnson to help launch the MBA program. And so today I spend about half of my time with online MBA courses and about half of my time with face-to-face undergrad leadership and business courses. And so one of my favorite parts of the MBA program is the capstone project. And so in that capstone project, the students bring together all that they've learned in their MBA courses to that point for the past 2 years they've been studying, and they develop a business plan, either for an organization they work with or familiar with or a nonprofit, and develop this business plan. So we've got a lot of experience working with organizations with the business plan. So what I want to focus on here for this workshop is the business side of business as mission. And it can also be called marketplace ministry, social entrepreneurship. There's a number of different titles for it. But there's some great scriptural and mission aspects of business as mission. But what I want to do now is just focus on the business side of it. We'll leave the mission aspect for another time and another workshop. But looking at the business side and how do we develop this? Milton Friedman's one of the great economists, particularly of the 20th century, and he says one of the great mistakes is to judge policies and programs by their intentions rather than their results. And so one of the challenges we've got in business as mission is we've got all of these great ideas and intentions, and the failure rate of business as mission is really high. And the problem is all these great intentions often don't translate into success because there's not been a business philosophy going into it and a business undergirding of the ideas that and a business plan that will help increase the probability of success. And so that's why I'm such a big proponent of developing a business plan and understanding what's going on in the business world. And so we'll take a look at what that includes. And so developing that business plan is going to be foundational for success going forward. So some of the business plans that we've worked on, a lot of really interesting ones. I picked 3 here to share with you just as an overview. One of them was a retreat center in Romania, and located in the mountains of the Alps. There was a small facility located there. An American family had offered to provide $1 million to help expand and build on that further. But they said, we want to see a business plan. How are you going to run this? What is this going to look like? We don't want to just put money into a project without knowing it's going to be successful. And so we want to know, how are you going to use it? What do the financials look like? How are you going to market it with the local churches, with ski tourists? What's all that look like? And so we had 2 students that partnered up on this project, delivered a great business plan. The organization in Romania forwarded it to the family. The family said, yep, that's what we're looking for. Go for it. And here's a picture of the partially completed facility that's underway there. So one example of how a business plan was used to inform donors of what to expect. Another one that we had was a local organization here in Knoxville that worked with the Hispanic community, and they were interested in expanding their services and potentially acquiring some property, be able to bring some businesses in, maybe charge some rent to other businesses to come in to serve that local Hispanic community, but they weren't sure what the dynamics would look like from a financial requirements. How much do they need? What's it going to cost to run? How many employees do they need? All of these things, how we're going to market this. And so we had 2 students again that paired up, and here we have a picture of them presenting to the board the plan for how they can make this successful. And finally, we had a church camp that was struggling financially, and so one of our students did a business plan for how they can regroup and drop some programs, add some things, what the financials look like, and keep the camp solvent for the long term. And so business plans are very valuable in understanding what's going on and projecting how can we be successful going forward. So there's 14 different components. So obviously I'm just going to touch briefly on each one, and I'll give you a resource if you want to dig further into each one, then you can do that. So I'm just going to touch briefly on each of these 14 components to give you a flavor for here's what should be included in a good business plan. So before you start, you want to understand what's your audience, who's your audience. And so the audience for a business plan could be potential investors or donors. It could be a bank if you're looking for money and they want to know what are you going to do. It could be internal. So it could be used as a tool for developing your own staff to say, here's what we're doing, here's where we're going, and providing direction there. So before you start, you want to say, okay, who's my target audience here? And that's going to help guide some of the questions that you're seeking to answer as you go through the business plan, understanding who that audience is. So the first section, as we get into the business plan, is the company description. So here we're going to describe, this is us. And so the first thing is a company name. So let's say, for example purposes, I'll use a coffee house. Coffee houses are very popular. Everybody wants a coffee house. And so the first thing, if we're going to start a coffee house in a particular location, the first thing we got to do is come up with a good name. It's got to be a catchy name, something that represents us. And so we got to get a good company name. Then we need a mission statement, vision, that kind of thing. Who are we? What are we trying to accomplish here? So that's going to be in the description. The legal status of the organization. Is this going to be a partnership, sole proprietorship, 501c3? How are we going to organize and structure this coffee shop? The products and the services. So what are we going to offer? Okay, if we're going to do coffee, are we going to do it Dunkin' Donuts style, fairly inexpensive and fairly basic? We're going Starbucks, where we're going to put in all of the different types and flavors and all of that. How much are we going to charge as far as what's our target in general? So there's a lot of things we can look at in products and services. Are we going to bring food in? Maybe we're going to bring bakery items in. So what does that look like? The leadership team. So this is of paramount importance to external people. They want to know who's involved, who are the partners, who are the leaders, who's the CEO, the president, the executive director, whatever titles we're going to have. What does that look like? And so we'll give a quick overview here in the company description. We'll have a little more detail later, but a quick overview of here's the leadership of this organization and the location, so where are we going to be, the current stage, so have we already started the process here, and financial status also goes with that. Have we already raised some money? Do we, where are we? Or is this just an idea that's going to happen in a couple of years? So where are we in the status? So this is going to be under the company description. Then we're going to look at industry analysis and trends. So what's going on in this business? And so again, if we're looking at a coffee shop, then how's the coffee business doing? So the big obvious ones are Starbucks and Dunkin' Donuts, and how are they doing? What's their profitability, sales trends, all of that kind of thing. But we're going to be competing with local. We want to look at what's going on in the business and how's this looking and the business going forward. And one of the great examples of this, I was talking to Stephanie Reid at Rafa International. We were over in Cambodia looking at the sewing machines and all the things. They're training the girls that have been trafficked. They're training them a skill that they can take with them to earn a living. And sewing is a great way that they can do that in Cambodia and Thailand, and that works really well. And you've probably seen their booth at ICOM and the products that the girls are making. The challenge they had was when they moved to Haiti, the same market doesn't exist in Haiti. And so fortunately, the team at Rafa looked at this and they said, we really can't sell clothes in Haiti because there's boats unloading tons, literally tons of clothing from the US. And so the locals aren't willing to pay for clothes. They can get it for free. And so teaching the girls to sew was really not a good option. So they had to step back and look at other options that were available. So that was a really smart way to analyze the industry and the trends and say, that's not going to be a good plan. We need to go to another plan. And so anyway, so you want to do that and look at what are the industry trends going on. And then you want to look at the target market. Who are you trying to reach with your business? And so in the coffee shop, maybe we're going for the young professionals that don't mind spending $5 for a cup of coffee. Or maybe we're going for a different segment of the market. And so what we want to do is identify who are we targeting, and that's going to drive things like product selection. How do we decide what to sell? Well, it depends on who we're trying to reach, because different demographics like different things. And so we need to identify the demographics that we're going for. What type of person is going to come shop? That's also going to drive the marketing, obviously. So how do we reach that target market? So then we need to look at the competition. So this is somewhat similar to looking at industry trends, but this is getting more specific. So now we're looking at specific competitors. And things like, what are their pricing? Can we forecast what their margins might be? What are we going to have to do? Are we going to be growing at the expense of the competitors? Maybe it's a mature market and we're going to have to steal customers from our competitors. Or maybe it's a blue ocean strategy where there's plenty of opportunity out there, but we still have competition. And one of the mistakes that folks make a lot of time when they look at competition is looking at who's doing exactly the same thing I'm doing. But what you want to do is look at who is it that is taking away from what I want to accomplish. And so churches are a good example. So churches sometimes look at other churches as their competition for members. But in reality, the real competition to look at is, what are people doing on Sunday morning instead of going to church? It's youth sports leagues, for example. It's fishing at the lake. That's competition just as much as the Catholic Church down the street. And so we've got to focus on who is our real competition that we're trying to get attention. So then we're looking at strategic position and risk assessment. And one of the great ways to do this is a SWOT analysis. So you may be familiar with a SWOT analysis. This is looking at the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And so we've got a little 2x2 chart here that shows items of internal origin, so attributes of the organization. If they're helpful, they're strengths. So where are we strong? And if they're harmful, then they're weaknesses. Where do we have weaknesses? And then if they're external in nature or part of the environment, they're opportunities. So maybe there's brand new apartments coming in close to where we want to launch our shop, and so that's an opportunity. That's an external attribute. And then threats, a bad economy, for example, or trade disputes or things like that would be external threats to the organization. And then when you look at risk assessment, we want to look at identifying a risk. And so let's say, for example, we're going into an area that does not have a reliable supply chain. So vendors sometimes are out of stock. They can't get to where we are. Maybe we're in a remote location. And so how do we get stock? So we identify the risk first and say, okay, there's a risk that there may be days we don't get shipments. Okay, then we assess the risk. Okay, what is it? And then move on to control or mitigate. How do we mitigate this risk? Well, maybe we need to keep more inventory on hand so that when a shipment doesn't arrive, it doesn't mean we can't open that day. It just means we've got to go to the warehouse and pull some extra inventory out, and then review the controls as we progress. Is it working? And then it's circular, then identifying the risk again. So what we want to do is identify all of the risks that may come into play here and how we're going to mitigate those. Then we get to a marketing plan and sales strategy. So the marketing plan is everything from logos, website, social media. How do we reach out to people and get them to come see us? And again, some of this is going to depend on your industry, and your target audience is going to drive a lot of this plan. So, but these days, the website and the social media is huge. Printed material and some of the more traditional, probably not as impactful. And the other great thing about website and social media is it's cheap. And so you can reach a pretty broad audience with marketing in that regard. And then sales strategy, how do we convert those folks into actual sales? Operations is going to include everything from facilities. So we're going to rent a space, and we're going to buy property. What about equipment? So we've got our coffee shop, and we've got machines. We need an espresso machine, and where do we get that? What does that look like? The operations are going to include everything from supply chain. So who are our vendors? Where are we buying things from? It's going to include the people that are working for us, and so everything from scheduling, human resources, all of those things. How do all of these things work together and come together as a plan for the operations of the business? The technology plan, these days you just can't go without a technology plan. And so whether it's, how many laptops, if we're going to have a cash register, what does that look like? Are we going to use an iPad? What's the technology for that? Just all of the things we're going to need to connect the business and the people together. So what kind of technology are we looking for? And then the management and organization. So I mentioned this earlier in the company description where we highlight the leaders. Here we go into a little more detail. And like I said, particularly for a new business, banks and investors and other folks are really interested in the people, because if there's no track record to demonstrate that this is going to work, then the key is, who are the key players? Have they done this before? Have they been successful? And so you probably want to put a brief bio of the key principles of the organization. Here's who this is, and here is why they are going to be instrumental in making this a success. And so what does that look like? And so then you can also see from an org chart perspective, it's going to be interesting to see how it's organized. Okay, we've got a board of directors, we've got a CEO, we've got department heads. There are 4 department heads, and then under those we have additional people. And so as a potential investor, for example, I can look at that and I can understand, all right, here's how this business is going to be run. And in this also, you might put a some information about corporate culture. Here's the culture that we want to build or that we already have. For example, one of the things that's popular is servant leadership. And so, if you want to say we're managed under a servant leadership principle, what does that look like? What do you mean? And how does that play into the business itself? And so all of this would be in that management and organization section. Then we get to social responsibility and sustainability, and that's sort of a secular description of what we might call the mission. So what's our mission here? And a popular way to summarize this is people, planet, and profit. The 3 Ps, the triple bottom line, this is called sometimes. So people, how are we going to engage in people? So if we're working on a mission, for example, who are the people that we're trying to benefit? Who's going to win from this? How are we going to serve the people involved, whether it's in the community, whether it's the employees? What does that look like? Profit, profit sometimes is a dirty word, but if you're not making a profit, you're not going to be in business. And so you need that profit to be able to serve the people. And so what does that look like? How are you going to get it? What's the projection? That type of thing can be in profit. And then planet, how are you going to take care of from an environmental standpoint, be good corporate citizens of the community, that type of thing. What does that look like? And so we want to have a section that brings all of that together to describe what we've got. Development, milestones, and an exit plan. So development, what are the steps? And this leads to milestones. What are the steps? How are we going to grow this business? And so milestones might be, for example, again, let's go back to the coffee shop example. Maybe we say, after 1 year, we're going to add a dinner menu and have sandwiches or whatever, and we're going to grow our product offering at that point. Maybe you say when sales in this location reach $300,000 a year, annualized, then we're going to open a different location over here. And so that would be a milestone. Okay, once something happens, then this is going to lead us to take some action. And of course, these things can be modified, but at least having a plan to start with is a good idea. But then one of the things that's interesting that not many people do is the exit plan. At what point do you exit out of this business? Whether you sell it, whether you somehow you yourself are going to be handing the reins over to somebody else. If it's a mission and you're in another country, maybe you've got a target for, I'm going to transition this over to the locals and let them run it at a certain point. Well, what does that look like? At what point then do you transition? What needs to happen for you to transition the ownership or at least the management over to others? So what's your exit plan for the business? Financials are perhaps the most complicated part of the business plan, but potentially the most important. You got to know, what does the cash flow look like? Are we going to make money on this? Is it going to be profitable and sustainable or not? And so making assumptions are key. So we've got to make good assumptions. I've had business plans before that say, well, we're going to start with no business on this year, and by next year we'll be having $2 million a year in sales. Okay, under that assumption, this is a great business plan and profitable and sustainable, and we're going to be awesome. The reality is, to go from 0 to 2 million in 1 year, highly unlikely. And so we've got to moderate those expectations. And so what you want to do is have assumptions that are realistic. So for example, in a coffee shop, how many customers do we expect to come in each day? How much do we expect each of them to spend? What's our profit margin going to be on each of those? And we can multiply that out and build financial statements that say, okay, if we have X number of customers and Y income per customer and our cost of goods is Z, then we'll make profit of $10,000 a month, for example. And so then I can make some projections and see, okay, now how much do we pay in rent? How much do we pay our employees? What's our cost of goods? All these things, and get to the financial statements. So there's three key financial statements that we want to look at. One is the income statement. And the income statement is almost like if you record a video, it's over time. So what happened in a certain time period, a quarter or a year? Let's say a year, for example. At the end of a year, what were our sales? What was our profitability? That kind of thing. Cash flow projections focus specifically on what are the sources of cash, what are the where are we spending our cash, and where is do we have a negative part that we're going to have to cover? So we may look at the expenses and say, in April we're projected to be $20,000 in the hole on cash. Okay, well, we got to come up with $20,000 somewhere because we know that's coming, and you don't want to get to April and not be able to pay the bills, pay your salaries because you didn't adequately project. We've got these expenses, we're going to have a lull, it's a seasonal business, whatever, and so we've got to accomplish that. And then finally, the balance sheet. And so balance sheet is like a snapshot in time on one date. What were our assets? What were our liabilities, etc. So let's look at some examples. So the income statement, this is a very simplified version, but gives a general overview. So we're going to start here with our net sales of 510,000. Our cost of goods sold, 360. So this is what we paid for the goods that we resold. So we have a gross profit of 150,000. Then we've got selling, general, and administrative expenses of 100,000. And so then our income before taxes is 50,000. Then let's say that we're projecting we'll pay 12,000 in income taxes, and so our net income then is 38,000. So this provides a good forecast. So we can have what's called a pro forma financial statement. So a pro forma income statement is going to be a projection. Here's what we think is going to happen. And then an actual income statement is here's what actually happened in the last year. So in a business plan, we're going to be doing pro formas. We're going to be projecting out, and the timeline is generally between 3 and 5 years you want to project out. So what does this look like 3 to 5 years out? And are we going to be growing the business? And so how much do sales increase each year? Likewise, taking a look at expenses, that type of thing. Maybe we're going to have additional expenses at some point, and we account for that going forward. So the balance sheet, then again, is this snapshot in time. So in this case, and a lot of times it's the last day of the year, so December 31st. And so we look at current assets. And so current assets are assets that can readily be converted to cash within a year. And so you've got cash, obviously, but accounts receivable. What do other people owe us that we expect to be paid? And usually 30 to 60 days is sort of a typical cycle of when you get paid. How much inventory do we have? If we've prepaid expenses that we haven't actually incurred yet, and maybe we've got some investments. So all of this would be our current assets. Then we've got fixed assets, property and equipment. And so if we've purchased land or buildings, equipment, that type of thing, then what's the value of those? And these are items that cannot be readily converted to cash within a year. Now, in reality, you could sell property at some price in less than a year, but that's not the plan. You don't have a plan to sell the property within a year. On the current assets, you do plan to convert these to cash within a year. And then you've got other assets. Intangible assets might be patents or goodwill or something like that, that you may or may not have any of those. So we have the total assets here, 472,000. Then current liabilities, just like the assets, less than a year. So this is money that we're going to owe within the next year. So we've got accounts payable. What have we bought from our vendors on credit that we're going to have to pay them? Notes payable would be to a bank. Long-term debt might be land or equipment where we've got a mortgage or a longer-term loan that we're paying back. So we have our total liabilities. And the difference between the total assets and the total liabilities is going to be shareholders' equity or owner's equity. So if it's a corporation, it might have common stock, retained earnings. For a business as mission, it might be more likely just be owner's equity in that. And so the total of the liability and the shareholders' equity is going to be the asset, which is why they call it a balance sheet. The numbers balance. So anyway, so that is a balance sheet, and then a cash flow statement. What we're going to do is look at what was the cash income, and we're going to make some adjustments from the income statements and come up with, okay, where's the cash coming from, where's the cash going. And so here was the cash that was invested in our business, cash from financing. So we have creditors and we have shareholders in this case. So that's sources of cash. Here's from operations. And so then we can look at the bottom line and say, okay, we started with zero cash. We added almost 5 million based on cash flow from operations, investment, and financing. And then we can look over time and see how the business is going. The main thing that you want to look at in a cash flow is, do you have negatives? Are you projecting based on what you're projecting as sales and expenses and all of those things? Are there periods where it's going to go negative or even low? You want to have a certain safety net there that you keep. And it could be 40 to 80 days, 90 days, something like that worth of operations that you keep cash on hand to be able to make sure that you can always pay your bills. So now that we've gone through the 13 parts of the business plan, now we get to the executive summary, which is actually the first part of it. But we wait and save the executive summary till last because we want to summarize what we found in the other 13 sections. And the executive summary is the most important part of the entire business plan because this is where you have got to grab your audience attention. So if you have a potential investor or donor, they're going to read the executive summary and then decide whether they're going to read the rest of the document or not. They may read the executive summary and say, this isn't for me. Or they may read it and say, that sounds fascinating, I want to know more. So this is just critical that you nail the executive summary, that you get it right, that it is fascinating, it draws your audience in and says, I want to know more. So the executive summary itself, what you want to do is, of those previous 13 sections, you want to pull out the parts that are most interesting and most relevant for your business. And it's not going to be the same necessarily for everybody. Some of the portions that would be the same, for example, though, are the leadership team. So in the executive summary, you want to tell who is the leadership team and how are they going to make this successful. And then you're going to look, quick overview of the financials and that type of thing. So the executive summary is very important. So some of this information I have developed, and what we use in our Johnson MBA program is this book from Abrams called Successful Business Plan. This is the #1 business plan, well, as it says right there on the book, #1 best-selling business plan guide. The reason it's #1, I think, is because it's easy to understand. She does a really nice job of speaking plain English and describing here's what you need to include, whereas some of the others are a little more technical and a little more difficult to read. So this is available on Amazon and it's reasonably priced. And so I would recommend, if you want to dig further into this and get more details, and I've based a lot of the information that I've provided from this book. And so this is a great investment if you're talking about, or if you're thinking about getting into a business plan. This is a great investment for you. I'd recommend it. So if you have any questions, feel free to shoot me a note. So I've got my name, my email address down here at the bottom. If you want to engage an MBA student, so you may have watched this and said, I'd love to have my nonprofit or my mission have a student do a business plan for me. One of the things that we do is we allow the students to bring their own plan from where they work, or if they don't have one, then I help provide one. And so I sort of keep a little library of people who are looking for business plans, and I can present it to them and say, here's 2 or 3 organizations that would like somebody to do a business plan for them. And so they can choose that and work with you on developing one for you. Or if you're interested in becoming a student, maybe you watch this and you go, I'd like to get an MBA. It's fully online and very flexible, and so I'd be glad to answer any questions on that as well. So I thank you for your time and joining me. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to let me know. Thanks.